One thing that's true in life and certainly in comic books is that if you want to change things, if you want to grow things, if you want to be successful in things, you have to understand why things are happening. Just being mad about something will only take you so far. Eventually, understanding is what locks in a platform that allows you to grow. Comics typically has a problem with this. So I'm going to take a bit of a historical perspective and show why understanding why has always been a bit of a difficulty for the comic industry. Hey, everybody, this is Perch. This is one of those kinds of topics, like comic history, like a lot of things, where people say they really want it, but then it does it doesn't get a lot of attention. But again, who cares? It's every now and then I go look at the analytics section in YouTube, and it's like I don't know. I mean, it paints a clear picture in many cases of what people like and what get clicked on and what doesn't. But it also is terribly random, and I think at a certain point, I just don't know how valuable it is. I mean, I appreciate everybody who comes in here and listens to me blab. That's the part I take away from this more than anything. Whether it gets a 5 views, 100 views, 1,000 views, it's like I'm just grateful that any of you are spending your time with me. Let's get through COVID and get together in real life. That's what we need to do. Anyway, comics has this pattern of repeating its same mistakes, and in some cases, it's for example, a creator who gets hired at one company is a nuisance and then goes to another company is a nuisance, or somebody who's late in one area gets hired and they're late again. uh, Very rarely do things turn around and people get back to fixing some of these mistakes. They tend to make them over and over and over again. That's a combination of there's just not enough money in comics to really dig in and correct some of these problems, and it's also so small time in a lot of cases it allows certain behavior to keep going. I mean, let's say you get a real kind of ass of a creator, but if they sell books, you're pretty much just going to put up with that because what's the motivation to really change? There's just not enough money to play with it and to really kind of teach different lessons. Eventually, history will wash some of these people out, but it takes a long time. In addition, I think you look at certain decisions that were made maybe out of haste. The direct market is such a fascinating kind of piece of history because you had comics being sold into the newsstand, and comics were a pump and dump kind of atmosphere. I, it's one of those things that I bring up every now and then when people talk about how comics used to sell 500,000 copies of everything and now they don't. Well, the reality is in that number they're counting things like the newsstand, where maybe this one huge distributor chain will buy 200,000 copies of a comic book, but maybe if they're lucky, 50,000 copies that are actually getting bought and taken home to somebody's house. The majority of which are getting pulped, meaning you're ripping the cover off and you're pulping them. By the way, some people have drawn that comparison to, well, isn't that the same as a direct market today where the retailer orders, say, 50 copies of Captain Marvel and sells 10? Those aren't getting all the way through to consumers. Well, no, it's different for one huge fundamental reason. When you pulp those comics, they were getting returned. The money was flowing back. It wasn't like your local grocery shop was paying out of pocket for 100 copies, selling 10, and then just eating that 90. No, they were pulping them, and by pulping them, they weren't just throwing them away. They were returning the comic to get their money back, basically. And I should go into the exact economics at some point. It's all, none of it's one to one, but the vast majority of stuff that was getting printed was not getting sold. Today, what's being printed is all getting sold. The difference is the retailer is just footing this bill. In many cases, it's not going all the way to the consumer, but even then, there's not massive quantities of comics getting pulped, because if there were, comic shops would be going out of business. And you might say, well, they're going out of business, but no, I mean much faster. There's a huge difference between, man, I've got these 20 extra copies of Captain Marvel on the shelf versus, hey, I've got these, this 500 copies of everything on the shelf. It's a way different world. Regardless, no, I'll stop there. Um, it's interesting how comic books as an industry tends to make a lot of the same mistakes over and over again, but very rarely does it ask itself, why? Why did we make this mistake? With the direct market, things flowed to basically that the retailers were going to get a higher percentage cut because they were, we got rid of returnability, and that was way better for the publishers. It gave them a lot more predictability into what sold, what didn't. It clarified the numbers. That was great. But then it caused other problems. Like, the retailers were creating a lot of the burden, but a lot of the big publishers were still treating that market kind of like the old world. They never kind of upped their game on the marketing and the sell through to the local comic shop because, when they were selling millions of copies to gas stations and grocery stores and everything else, they really didn't need to do that marketing. Comics were just there. It was a cost of doing business. The supermarket's going to have a magazine rack, and part of that magazine rack is comics because you want to have something for the kids. It was just, the cost of doing business. Your marketing was way different from a world where you're producing comics for the direct market, where, that direct market doesn't need to order all these comics. By the way, somebody asked this question once, and I guess I'll answer it here, but I should have answered it somewhere else. Is, well, does the comic shop have to order all the comics? Do they have to buy everything that Marvel sells? And the answer is no. You definitely don't. If you want to, you could sign up and buy, the Dawn of X titles and Spider-Man, and that's it. You can just order none of those. You can put a zero down. Now Marvel and others will offer incentive programs to encourage you to order more, but no, you don't have to order all of somebody's line. And many comic shops don't. I mean, here's the crazy part is many comic shops will try and offer at least a little bit of everything, but they get down into like the 2 copies, 5 copies at most of some titles. Sometimes they only order it for the pull box. That's not uncommon. In the world of the newsstand, comic publishers really didn't have to worry too much about marketing a new comic or marketing a line. If they did, they were marketing it to a big buyer who was buying it for many parts of the channel. When they went to the direct market, a lot of publishers were really happy because, hey, no more returnability to deal with. Hey, financially, it was a better deal for them. However, they never upped their game on the marketing. And so as a result, through the 90s and the 2000s and the 2010s, I think the publishers in particular left a ton of money on the table by not actively managing their business. And so as we think about kind of the Joe Quesada era at Marvel and the Dan Didio and Bob Harris and those kind of eras over at DC, one of the big failings is, and I know I've slammed on this many times, is that by failing to push the marketing and in many cases just kind of assuming that your local comic shop was going to do it for you on their own at a local or regional level, that was crazy. It was putting a lot of risk into your brand. And if you look at a lot of these new initiatives, it makes sense why they failed. There's been some good comics out there that would have had a chance to be very, very successful, but the publisher never asked themselves why they weren't, because the answer usually reflected back on themselves. And think about the entire chart. I'm trying to put all these pieces together. Think about when the publishers say things like, we're trying to increase diversity. We're trying to find new markets. Sounds great. On paper, that's a good idea. You're trying to diversify your profits. Good. That's less risk in one place. You're trying to find new markets to bring more sources of cash in. Good. That lowers the risk of one of those markets going away. However, when you do that, when you put these things together, if you view your job as, okay, we're going to make a statement, we're then going to do maybe a talent search, we're going to meet with some people and see, find somebody we like to work with from our perspective. Do they do, focus groups or user analysis? No, those things don't happen. That very rarely happens or never happens. But we're going to decide these projects. We're going to put them out. We're going to solicit an audience. We're going to keep it to a budget. we're going to do a press release at, say, USA Today or The Atlantic or, whatever. But it's basically a press release. And as much as people in companies or marketing will tell you, press releases are cheap. Anyone can do them. I personally have written some press releases. It doesn't matter. I mean, it's news one day, gone the next. It's perfunctory and getting more so. 20 years ago, the press release probably had more impact. Today, there's so much news out in the channel, it doesn't matter anymore. Nobody's paying attention. You can't stay indexed in even Google News for more than 8 hours on a press release, if that. And then they stop. Then they ship the comic to the market, and that's it. So while they may want to open up new markets, while they may want to diversify their audiences, it's not happening. And unless you're absolutely crazy or extremely disingenuous, it's not happening. You're getting the sales figures. You can make all the arguments you want about, well, the graphic novel sales will be good or libraries will pick it up or anything else. But, numbers are numbers. You can't say, yeah, I tried this new title for a new market and it sold 25,000 copies of floppies, but it sold a small handful. It showed up on the New York Times bestseller list for graphic novels at position number 14 for a week and then dropped. That's not a success. People need to recalibrate what success looks like, because they kid themselves into thinking that that's some kind of, you've won something, but you haven't. If your bar should always be what's going on at the top. I've heard people on crowdfunding kind of poo-poo this as well, saying, well, you can't judge success of a crowdfunding by the top guys. Yeah, you can. You absolutely should. If that's not your goal, then what are you doing? Your goal should be to be number one, to be at the top. That should always be your goal. Why are you playing if you're playing for like 50th place? That seems just insane. So it's interesting to see these continual lessons go down and where they all hit. But this is where comics really struggles with learning the lessons that's happened in the past. I don't know. I'll go more into this topic, but curious about your thoughts and your comments. Leave a comment below. Like, subscribe, click the bell for notifications. Follow me on social media, email, all the rest. I'll keep going into this because it's interesting to see where comics fail to learn from their mistakes. But most importantly, thanks for listening.